As part of the NAR Act initiative, we essentially have three pillars that we're focusing our programs and efforts around, and that is accountability, culture change, and training. So I'm talk a little bit about some of the programs and some of the initiatives that we're focused on and kind of give you an update as to where we are today. But before I dive into that, I just want to make sure that everybody's sort of, and I'm probably sure most people are aware of sort of what the impetus for the NAR Act initiative was. You'll probably in your fair housing courses have seen or at least heard about the 2019 Newsday investigation, where testers were sent out to 11 or 12 of the largest real estate brokerage companies in Long Island to find out whether or not agents and brokers were complying with the fair housing laws. And what they found were some shocking revelations. All right, they found widespread steering and unequal treatment by real estate agents. And we're of the view that Long Island is not an island unto itself, and it's quite possible that what was revealed here could be happening in other parts of the country. I just pulled out some of these more sort of glaring statistics just to give you an idea of what happened with that testing. It was found that real estate agents, there was unequal treatment against African Americans 49% of the time, against Hispanic Americans 39% of the time, and overall against buyers of color 40% of the time. So just an idea of some of the statistics that came out of this investigation. NAR chose to use this incident as an opportunity to really make our fair housing program more robust. So hence we have the pillars. So the first one is the accountability pillar. So one of the programs that we're focused on under the accountability pillar is our self-testing program, which we launched in 2022. We had a pilot with a real estate brokerage company out of St. Louis. But essentially what we're doing is we have partnered with a fair housing organization that focuses on, their specialty is testing. So we partnered with this organization. Brokers and brokers can elect to voluntarily participate in the program. It's confidential self-testing, and it's really a great risk management tool, sort of find out, what are my agents doing? Are they compliant? And if they're not, what can we do to make sure they get in compliance? What are some of the best practices that we can share? So we piloted the self-testing program in 2022. This year, we have 3 brokerage companies that are participating in the self-testing program. And just to give you an idea of what the training is about. So once a broker elects to participate, then their agents will be tested. We focus on sales testing, but there may be some rental testing in there as well. So we do the testing, and then once we've got the results of the testing, we go out and train. We partner with the testing organization, and we go and train and kind of basically let them know like what the results were, what we found out. So the training consists essentially of kind of explaining what the importance of testing is. Why do we do it? Why is it so important when it comes to enforcing fair housing laws? We talk a little bit about the history of housing discrimination and really try to localize it. So there's a little bit of local history, a little bit of national history. And then we use the case studies that, the testing results, we turn them into case studies, and we talk about them, talk about what went well, what didn't go well. And then of course we end with some best practices and some tips and things that we think agents and brokers can do to really make sure that they're in compliance. So that's give you a little bit of a broad overview of what the self-testing training kind of looks like. So that's our accountability kind of program that we're focused on right now. When it comes to culture change, so that's another one of our pillars. One of the programs that we're really excited about, and we'll be receiving applications for our 2023 Realtor Fair Housing Champions in September. During RLM, which is our mid-year conference, I'm sure you guys are familiar, we celebrated our 2023 champions. We had Ava Barnes, Sophia Crisp, we had Frank Williams. all of them were honored for the work that they're doing to advance fair housing and expand homeownership in their communities. And one of the things that we're hoping is that when folks see these folks and all the great things that they're doing, that they will be inspired to do the same thing, maybe to replicate some of the ideas or to come up with their own ideas about what they can do in their own communities and neighborhoods to further fair housing and advance home ownership. So we hope that these folks inspire our members to go in a similar vein. Realtor.com has been a great partner. They provide a $5,000 prize to each of the winners that they can dedicate to a housing organization of their choice. And of course, we feature and promote the great work that the champions are doing throughout our conferences and whenever we can. So that's kind of our focus with regard to culture change. Talk a little bit about what we're doing on the trainings in the training space. And hopefully you all are aware of NAR's Bias Override course. It's a fantastic training. So far, we've had over 65 associations offer the course. And if you're interested, if state is interested or one of the locals are interested, you want to reach out to Dawn Hedke. I know in Maryland, it had been mentioned that I came from Maryland Realtors. We have been able to get the Bias Override course approved for 3 hours of continuing education credit. It's a wonderful course. Let me tell you just a little bit about it for those of you who may not have gone through it. It is a certificate course, so once you complete the program, you will receive the certificate. But the goal is to help realtors interrupt the stereotypical thinking, potential bias, so that they can avoid fair housing pitfalls. And like I said, with the Long Island Divided investigation, we saw what was happening. We think it's probably happening in other places, and we think it's important to equip you with tools and resources so that you don't go down that go down that road. So participants learn about, which I think is really fascinating, the mind science, how our minds work. How does bias come in there, and how it can lead to a fair housing violation. There are interactive exercises, there are impactful videos, there's focus on the history, and then of course there are tools, best practices, the interventions, we call them, of ways that you can sort of override the biases so that you can provide equal professional services to all of the folks who come before you, consumers and clients. And we hope that at the end of the day, the folks who take the course, they're motivated to share what they learned with others so that more folks take the course. And I've taught the course myself several times, and every time I teach it, I learned something. It's one of the most engaging and impactful courses that I've ever taught. So encourage you to take it if you haven't already. Also, we have our Fair Haven training, and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening with that. So far, we've had over 60,000 realtors complete Fair Haven, and we have 10,000 who have started it and who are in process. It takes about an hour and a half to go through the online training. But just a little bit about what's happening with Fair Haven. It's a simulation training. You can do it at your leisure. You can go back to it, you can stop, but again, it takes about an hour and a half to go through. And what we're doing is we're using the power of storytelling to help you identify and prevent and address fair housing and discrimination as you see it. Basically, you're working against the clock and you have to sell 4 properties, and you're presented or confronted with different discriminatory scenarios, and you have to kind of figure out what to do. You also walk in the shoes of a home buyer. So there's that sort of twist on it. We customize the feedback, and it's done in a way that you can sort of incorporate it into your daily interactions. And the wonderful thing about Fair Haven training is that it is free. So check it out if you haven't already. It is a great training as well. All right, so a little bit more about training with regard to this. And I don't know if any of you all had an opportunity to come to RLM in DC. Let me go back. But if you did, you may have heard that there was a work group on fair housing training that was formed from our various committees, our Membership Policy Committee, the Board Jurisdiction Committee, the Fair Housing Policy Committee, Association Executives, and the Professional Development Committee. They all came together and essentially made a recommendation to the Board of Directors. So what is that recommendation? That we have our realtor members take 2 hours of fair housing training every 3 years, and it would coincide with the Code of Ethics training beginning in 2025. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our licensing research project that we're working on. But what we uncovered with that project is that we found that there are many states that don't require any kind of fair housing training, whether it's pre-licensing or continuing ed. So that was kind of one of the things that we uncovered. But with this particular requirement, which again will take effect in 2025, you'll be required to take 2 hours of fair housing training every 3 years. So what are the courses that satisfy the requirement? You can take the bias override course. You can take At Home with Diversity, or any of the equivalent courses, fair housing courses that are provided by your state or local association, provided they meet the learning objectives. And of course, any fair housing courses approved by your state licensing agency, again, provided that they meet the learning objectives. So where does Fair Haven kind of play in that? What we are doing is we are overhauling our Fair Haven trainings to make sure that it meets the learning objectives. So it will probably end up being, we're going to incorporate some history and some of the other objectives and initiatives. It'll probably end up being about 2 hours. And then once we've overhauled it, updated it, then you'll be able to take the Fair Haven training, and that will also enable you to meet the requirement. And the Fair Haven update will happen before the requirement kicks in 2025. So that'll be another option of a way that you can fulfill the requirement. So just a little bit about the rationale as to why the committees that came together felt that it was important to have the training. You know, they believe, and I 100% agree, that as stewards of, we are stewards, right, of the right to own and use and transfer property. And so we recognize the importance of providing equal professional services. We know that requirement under Article 10, it's quintessential to our commitment and our high standards under the NAR Code of Ethics. And we are one of the first professional associations to have a Code of Ethics. So we hold it in such high regard. So this requirement also gives us an opportunity to affirm our Fair Housing Act initiatives. And of course, one of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten from previous fair housing trainings, I know we got this kind of feedback when I was at Maryland Realtors, is that the training, the classes that we were offering were not robust enough. And so we are charged with creating programs and trainings and educational resources that are substantive and engaging and impactful. And so that's what we are trying to do. Another piece to what we are doing, and I mentioned this a little bit, the fair housing enforcement research, where we found out that there are states that don't require any kind of fair housing training at all. So we put together some preliminary best practices that we will likely, ask our states to consider adopting. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those best practices. We're thinking that it's important that statutes, regulations expressly prohibit fair housing violations, that specific examples of violations are provided so that you know what is it okay to do, what isn't it okay to do. We think it's important to empower the licensing agency to investigate and discipline for fair housing without another agency doing it. And also, we think it's important to empower commissions to investigate a fair housing complaint absent a complaint actually being filed. We also think it's important to promote collaboration and coordination between the licensing body and the state human rights enforcement agency. And of course, we want to encourage transparency with regard to disciplinary reactions against licensees who have actually been found to have violated fair housing laws. So that's just an example of sort of some of the best practices under consideration. We are going to refine them and then kind of think about sort of what the next steps will be. One of the things that we did when we came up with these best practices is we reached out to state commissioners around the country to get their feedback. What we found is that many of them supported what we're trying to do. They believe that it's important to have that collaboration and working together of the licensing body and the enforcement body. They think it's important that the examples be there so people understand, what is a violation, what isn't. And they also thought it was important that there be public access to the databases of folks who have actually violated fair housing law. So they essentially think that we were on the right track. They also we took the note in terms of offering better fair housing education. And again, we think that we're on the right track. I wanted to mention this as well under the training pillar. We are in the process of providing a training for our appraiser members. Article 10, as you know, requires that we treat all of our consumers and customers equally. And so what does the training focus on? Really focuses on what it means to provide equal professional services for appraisers, right? Also in the training, there is some history around race and property values. We discussed the lingering impact of past practices, how they are sort of still with us playing out today. We talk about implicit bias. We analyze some case studies, really dig into, and for the case studies, we actually used some of the real life scenarios. I'm sure you have heard some of the issues around bias in appraisals that are happening around the country. There was a case out in California, another case in Maryland. So we use those cases to create an actual case study to talk about. And then of course we have some checklists and things like that. So the Fair Housing team, the Fair Housing Policy Committee is very busy. We partnered with other committees and we have come up with or prepared proposals that have been adopted by the board of directors with policy change 7 times in support of fair lending, special purpose credit programs, down payment assistance, diversity in the appraisal profession, which I think is really important, consumer protection around appraisals. We've urged our states to support legislation providing for heirs property reform. And of course, most recently, the recommendation to require fair housing training initially came out of the Fair Housing Committee and then went to the work group. So with that, that essentially is what I wanted to share with you today. Here's my contact information, and I always like to end with a quote. The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So I thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them.